Mom begged for hot water on Christmas Eve. What 200 Hell's Angels did next is unbelievable. Christmas lights flickered in the windows of every home, casting a warm glow that seemed to fight back against the cold that had settled everywhere. Inside one modest house at the edge of town, the heating had broken down earlier that day, leaving the family shivering despite wearing layers of sweaters and blankets. The wind howled against the windows, as if reminding everyone of just how cold it could get outside. Maria, the mother of the house, sat at the kitchen table rubbing her hands together, her fingers stiff from the chill. She had been trying to keep the fire going in the old fireplace, but the small logs barely produced enough heat to warm the room. Her two children, Lily and Sam, huddled under a blanket on the couch, their faces pale and teeth chattering. Maria's father, who lived with them and was recovering from an illness, shivered quietly in his chair by the window. She could see his lips turning blue with the cold, and it made her chest tighten. She had spent the entire day trying to prepare a Christmas Eve meal despite the freezing temperatures. The oven worked just enough to bake a small loaf of bread, but boiling water for tea or hot chocolate had proven impossible. Her mind raced with worry. How could she keep everyone warm and safe on a night that was supposed to be full of joy? The thought of the children lying awake shivering under blankets made her feel helpless. She looked at the clock. It was already late in the afternoon. The snowstorm was getting worse, and the sky outside had turned a dull gray, heavy with snow. Maria knew she had to do something. She had tried calling neighbors, but many of them were stuck in their homes too, struggling with the storm. She dialed the local emergency services, hoping for some assistance or at least advice on how to survive the night. After a long wait and several transfers, a tired voice came through the phone. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Our teams are fully engaged with other emergencies. There's nothing we can do right now." Maria hung up, feeling the weight of despair pressing down on her shoulders. She could feel the tears stinging her eyes as she looked around at her family. The children were huddled closer together, and her father was quietly shaking in his chair. The house, normally warm and lively with laughter and holiday cheer, felt empty and cold. Every little creak of the floorboards sounded louder in the silence, echoing the desperation in her heart. Her mind raced. She thought about leaving the house to find help, but the snow had already piled high on the streets. It would be nearly impossible to walk through it, and the thought of the children alone in the freezing house terrified her. She thought about going to the town center, where she might find a store or someone willing to help, but she knew the storm was worsening by the minute. The idea of venturing outside into the blizzard was frightening, but staying inside seemed almost as dangerous. She moved from room to room, checking on everyone. The children were wrapped tightly in blankets, their small hands trembling as they clutched each other. "Mommy, I'm cold," Lily whispered, her voice small and frightened. Maria knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I know, sweetie," she said softly. "I'm trying to fix it. We're going to be okay." She forced a smile, even though she didn't feel it. She wanted to give them hope, to make them believe that everything would be all right, even though she wasn't sure herself. Her father, sitting by the window, looked at her with concern in his tired eyes. "Maria, maybe it's not safe to go out there," he said quietly. "The storm is bad and you could get hurt." She nodded, knowing he was right, but she couldn't stop thinking about the children and how cold they were. The urgency of the situation pressed on her like a heavy weight. Desperation pushed her to try one last thing. She gathered all the blankets and piled them on the children and her father, wrapping them as tightly as possible. She set up every small heater they owned, though none of them produced much warmth. She went to the kitchen and tried again to heat water on the old stovetop, but the burner barely worked, leaving her with only lukewarm water at best. Tears ran down her cheeks as she realized she couldn't provide even the simplest comfort for her family on this night. The clock ticked slowly toward evening, and darkness fell over the snow-covered town. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and doors, making the house feel even colder. Maria sat on the floor, hugging her knees, feeling the weight of hopelessness. She thought about Christmases past, when the house was full of laughter, the tree decorated, the smell of cookies baking, and the warmth of love filling every room. Now all of that seemed so far away, almost like a dream. She tried to distract herself by thinking of what she could do to make the night special despite the cold. She pulled out the small box of decorations from the closet and tried to string some lights around the living room. The lights flickered weakly, but it was enough to create a small sense of cheer. Lily and Sam smiled faintly, their faces lighting up a little despite the shivering. Maria felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could make it through the night. As she sat there, the sound of engines suddenly broke through the wind outside. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, echoing through the snowy streets. Maria froze, her heart beating fast. Who could possibly be out in this storm? She peeked through the window, squinting through the falling snow. A group of motorcycles appeared in the distance, their lights cutting through the gray storm. She counted dozens, no, hundreds of them riding together in a tight formation, their engines roaring like thunder. Her mind raced. Were they trouble? Could it be dangerous? But something about the way they moved, so carefully and organized despite the storm, made her pause. She watched as they slowed near her house. One of the riders got off his motorcycle and walked toward her door. Maria's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew she had to face whatever was coming. She opened the door cautiously, her breath visible in the cold air. The rider approached slowly, raising his hand in a gesture of peace. Maria could see that he wasn't just one person. Behind him, dozens of others were stopping as well, looking toward her house with what seemed like concern. Her first instinct was fear, but it was quickly replaced by curiosity and a glimmer of hope. "Ma'am," the man said in a clear, calm voice, "we saw your house and thought you might need some help." Maria's eyes widened. She wanted to speak, to ask how this could be happening, but the words caught in her throat. She could only nod, unable to believe what she was seeing. The children peeked from the blanket fort they had made on the couch, eyes wide with wonder. Even her father stood slowly, still unsure but clearly intrigued. Maria took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of relief and disbelief. She didn't know why these strangers, who looked so intimidating on their motorcycles, were stopping to help her family, but she realized that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. The leader of the group gestured to his crew, and they began unloading supplies from their motorcycles. Maria's eyes widened as she saw blankets, bags of food, and even portable heaters. She couldn't believe what she was witnessing. In a single, unbelievable moment, a storm that had felt like it would never end now seemed full of possibilities. She turned back to her family, feeling a warmth in her heart that had nothing to do with heat. "Come on," she whispered to the children. "Let's see what's happening." Lily and Sam scrambled out from under their blankets, eyes shining with curiosity and excitement. Her father followed slowly, leaning on his cane but clearly smiling beneath his scarf. Together, they stepped outside into the cold, greeted by the roar of the motorcycles and the sight of hundreds of strangers showing an act of kindness that Maria would never forget. For the first time all day, Maria felt hope. She couldn't understand why this was happening, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that her family, shivering and cold just moments ago, was about to be cared for in a way she never thought possible. On that Christmas Eve, as the snow continued to fall, the fear and hopelessness that had filled the house began to melt, replaced by a sense of wonder, gratitude, and the unexpected magic of human kindness. The wind outside had not let up, but the sound of engines and voices created a strange sense of energy around the house. Maria stood in the doorway, her eyes wide, still unable to believe what was happening. The leader of the group, a tall man wearing a black leather jacket, approached slowly, holding out his hand in a calm and respectful gesture. Maria hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Somehow, she instinctively knew that this was not a threat. Behind him, the rest of the group began to organize. There were nearly 200 of them, each with a motorcycle gleaming under the snowfall, their presence both overwhelming and fascinating. Maria could see their faces now. Though many had tough expressions, there was something gentle in their eyes as they looked at her family. One by one, they began to unload supplies from their bikes. Blankets, boxes of food, thermoses, and even portable heaters were carefully carried inside. Maria's hands trembled as she helped take in some of the blankets. She could not understand how a group so large could be willing to stop in the middle of a snowstorm to help strangers. She looked at her children, whose eyes were wide with amazement and curiosity. Lily clutched Sam's hand tightly, unable to speak, while Sam's small mouth hung open in astonishment. Even her father, leaning on his cane, watched in disbelief as the strangers worked together quietly and efficiently. The leader walked into the living room, speaking softly so the children would not be frightened. "We are here to help," he said simply. "We saw your home from the road and knew you might need assistance tonight." His words were calm and steady, with no hint of the intimidating energy Maria had expected from a group so large. There was something about his voice that made her feel reassured, as though she could finally breathe after hours of anxiety. The Hells Angels moved with surprising organization. Some began setting up the portable heaters in the main rooms, carefully placing them where they would provide the most warmth. Others brought in blankets, folding them neatly and handing them to Maria to cover her children and father. A few of the bikers went outside to clear snow from the driveway, ensuring that the motorcycles could stay safely parked while the storm continued. Their actions were methodical, as though this was something they did regularly, yet it was clear from the way they approached her family that their concern was genuine. Maria felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had spent the entire day feeling helpless, unable to protect her family from the cold, but now it seemed that the impossible was happening. Her children stared at the bikers with wide eyes, whispering excitedly to each other about the big men on motorcycles who had come to their house. For a moment, the fear and discomfort of the freezing day were forgotten. The living room, though still cold, was filled with movement and purpose. One of the younger bikers, noticing the children's fascination with the motorcycles, knelt down and began telling them about the bikes. He spoke softly and gently, explaining how they worked and showing them the controls in a safe, simple way. Lily and Sam giggled with delight, and Maria watched, astonished at how natural the bikers were with the children. There was no intimidation here, only patience and care. It was almost as if they had stepped out of a storybook rather than the harsh reality she had feared. Meanwhile, the leader of the group checked on the fire in the fireplace. Though it had been weak all day, he managed to coax it into a brighter flame, carefully adding small logs and fanning the embers. The warmth from the fire began to fill the room, combining with the heat from the portable heaters. Maria could finally feel a real difference. The biting cold that had seemed impossible to escape was slowly retreating. Her father leaned back in his chair, relaxing for the first time in hours. As the bikers worked, Maria could not help but notice the way they coordinated without speaking too much. A glance, a nod, a simple hand gesture, and each person knew exactly what to do. It was impressive, almost mesmerizing. She had expected chaos from such a large group, but instead there was harmony, efficiency, and an almost unspoken respect for the family they had come to help. Food was brought in next. Some of the bikers had packed sandwiches, hot drinks, and snacks. They carefully placed them on the table, arranging them neatly for the family. Maria's mouth opened slightly in surprise. She had not expected anything so thoughtful. She looked at the children, whose eyes were now sparkling with curiosity and excitement, and realized that this night, despite its cold start, was turning into something magical. The leader approached her again. "We want to make sure you are comfortable," he said. "We have blankets, heaters, and hot water. We just need to know where you want us to set things up." Maria shook her head, still unable to speak. She pointed to the living room and then to the kitchen, trying to communicate where the items should go. The bikers nodded, understanding immediately, and began arranging everything with care. The children, now feeling safe and warm, began asking questions. "Are you Santa's helpers?" Sam whispered, half in awe and half in play. The bikers laughed softly, and one of them crouched down to explain that while they were Santa, they were here to help because it was Christmas and they wanted to make sure everyone was safe and warm. Lily smiled widely. "You're like Christmas heroes," she exclaimed. The biker smiled in return, and Maria felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the heaters. Outside, the snow continued to fall heavily, but the bikers paid it no mind. A group cleared a path from the driveway to the house, ensuring that the motorcycles could be safely parked and that no one would slip on the ice. Their teamwork was impressive, each person helping another without being asked twice. Maria watched from the doorway, her heart full of gratitude and disbelief. She could not understand why a group so large and so formidable would go out of their way to help her family, yet she was profoundly thankful. One of the bikers noticed that Maria's father was shivering despite the blankets and heaters. He gently offered him an extra coat and placed a warm thermos of tea beside him. "This will help," he said kindly. Maria's father looked at the man, surprised and touched. "Thank you," he murmured. The biker nodded, smiling, and returned to helping the children. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere inside the house began to change completely. What had started as a freezing, fearful night was now filled with warmth, laughter, and the quiet hum of engines outside. The children played quietly with some small toys the bikers had brought, and Maria could finally sit down without worrying that her family was in immediate danger. She watched the bikers work together seamlessly, noticing how even the youngest members seemed to know exactly what to do. Maria's mind raced with thoughts of disbelief. How could a group that many people feared, a group often spoken about with caution and even suspicion, be so generous, so caring? Every action they took contradicted the expectations she had built in her mind. And yet there was no question of their sincerity. They were here in the middle of a snowstorm, helping a family they had never met, doing everything they could to ensure their safety and comfort. The leader checked in once more, walking quietly through the rooms to make sure everything was in place. "Is everyone warm enough?" he asked gently. Maria nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "You've done more than I could have hoped for." The leader smiled faintly, then stepped back, letting his team continue their work without interrupting. By now, the living room was cozy. The heaters hummed softly, the fire crackled, and the children were wrapped in multiple blankets, their laughter filling the room. Even Maria's father looked relaxed for the first time since the day had begun. The bikers had not only provided warmth, but they had restored a sense of hope and comfort that had seemed impossible just hours before. Outside, the storm continued its relentless fall, but inside the house, it felt almost magical. The bikers moved quietly, efficiently, and respectfully, never demanding attention, never asking for thanks, yet giving more than Maria could have imagined. The sheer scale of their generosity was overwhelming. Maria felt her heart swell with gratitude. At one point, one of the bikers pulled out a small thermos of hot water and began carefully boiling it over a portable stove. He handed it to Maria, showing her how to make tea for the children. She could hardly believe her eyes. For hours, she had been desperate for something as simple as hot water, and now, thanks to these strangers, it was finally available. The children giggled as she poured the tea into cups, the warm liquid spreading comfort through their little hands. For the first time that day, Maria allowed herself to relax. She watched the bikers laugh softly among themselves as they finished organizing the last of the supplies. The hum of motorcycles outside, the crackle of the fire, the warmth of blankets, and the smell of hot tea combined to create a sense of normalcy she had feared lost forever. She realized that the storm outside, the cold, and the fear of being alone had all led to this moment. And though she could not understand why this group had stopped to help her family, she knew one thing for certain. Christmas Eve had turned into a night of unexpected kindness, warmth, and humanity. The warmth from the heaters and the fire had finally begun to chase away the chill. In the house, Maria watched in awe as the Hell's Angels moved about the rooms, each action filled with care and purpose. She had never seen anything like this in her life, people who many would call dangerous, showing nothing but kindness and concern for her family. The initial fear she had felt when seeing the motorcycles outside had completely disappeared, replaced with gratitude and disbelief. The children were now fully engaged with the bikers, laughing and asking questions. Lily was fascinated by a small collection of Christmas decorations the bikers had brought along, while Sam was captivated by the stories of the motorcycles. One of the bikers patiently showed Sam how to check the engine and explained, in simple words, how the machines worked. He even let Sam sit on the motorcycle, holding the handlebars while another biker stood close by to ensure his safety. The boy's eyes shone with excitement, and for a moment, Maria forgot about the freezing day and all the fear she had felt. Meanwhile, the adult bikers worked seamlessly, arranging blankets on the furniture, setting up extra seating for her father, and organizing the kitchen with food and hot drinks. Maria's heart swelled as she watched them. These were not random strangers. They had come prepared, knowing exactly what might be needed, and they were doing it with patience and care. They moved without fuss or argument, communicating through simple gestures and brief words. It was as if they had practiced this kind of teamwork for years, yet they were doing it now for a family they had never met. One of the bikers, noticing that Maria was still looking exhausted, approached her gently. "Ma'am, why don't you sit down for a bit? We'll take care of things for a while," he said softly. Maria hesitated, not used to accepting help from strangers, but she felt an overwhelming trust in the way he spoke. She nodded and sank into a chair near the fire, finally letting herself relax. For the first time all day, she could breathe deeply, feeling the warmth spread through her body. Outside, the snow continued to fall, heavy and relentless, but the bikers paid it no mind. A few of them had built small snow-clearing stations around the driveway and paths leading to the house, making sure that movement would be safe. The larger group stayed close, ready to respond to anything the family might need. Maria watched as they worked together with quiet efficiency, each person aware of their role and executing it flawlessly. It was impressive and humbling. The children, now fully warmed by blankets and hot tea, sat near the fire and shared their small toys with the bikers. Lily handed a tiny doll to one of the younger riders, who smiled gently and accepted it with a nod of appreciation. Sam, meanwhile, was proudly showing off his temporary motorcycle training, giggling every time he pretended to race around the living room. The house was now filled with laughter and light, a stark contrast to the cold and silence of only a few hours ago. The leader of the bikers, noticing the small holiday tree Maria had set up, knelt down beside it. "It looks beautiful," he said quietly. "I know it's been a hard day, but it's still Christmas. You deserve this little bit of joy." Maria looked at him, her throat tight with emotion. She could barely speak. "Thank you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. She realized that this night, which had begun with fear and despair, was transforming into something magical and unforgettable. Food was brought next. Some of the bikers had packed sandwiches, cookies, and other treats, carefully arranging them on the table. One of them even brought a small portable stove and began warming a pot of soup. Maria's children watched in amazement as the bikers worked together to prepare a simple but nourishing meal. She could hardly believe her eyes. For hours, she had worried about how she would feed her family, and now not only were they fed, but it was done with care and thoughtfulness. As the night wore on, the bikers continued to provide support in small but meaningful ways. One group helped set up extra blankets on chairs and couches so everyone could be comfortable. Another ensured that hot water was always available for tea and washing hands. One young biker even entertained the children with stories of their travels, keeping them engaged and calm. Every gesture, no matter how small, carried with it a sense of kindness and generosity that Maria had never imagined coming from this group. Maria's father, who had been quiet and reserved throughout the evening, finally spoke up. "I don't understand why you are helping us," he said softly, looking around at the bikers. "You don't even know us." The leader of the group looked at him kindly. "It's Christmas," he said simply. "Sometimes helping people in need is the best gift we can give. No one should be alone or cold on a night like this." Maria's father nodded slowly, his eyes shining with gratitude. The children, now fully relaxed, began asking questions about the bikers' lives. "Do you do this all the time?" Lily asked. One of the bikers smiled. "Not every day," he said gently, "but when we see someone in need, we try to help." "It's the right thing to do." Sam's eyes widened. "You're like real-life heroes," he exclaimed. The bikers laughed softly, a sound that was warm and genuine. Maria felt her heart swell with gratitude. Her children had witnessed an act of kindness so profound that it would stay with them forever. The evening continued with small acts of generosity. Blankets were adjusted, tea was refilled, and the children were given little treats to enjoy. Maria finally allowed herself to relax completely, sitting by the fire and watching the scene unfold. The fear and anxiety that had filled the house just hours earlier were completely gone. In their place was warmth, laughter, and a sense of safety that Maria had almost forgotten existed. At one point, the leader checked on the children, making sure they were comfortable and warm. "Are you both okay?" he asked. Lily nodded quickly. "Yes, thank you," she said. Sam, still excited from the earlier stories, nodded as well. The leader smiled and walked back to the other bikers, who were finishing organizing the remaining supplies. Every detail had been attended to, and every member of the family was cared for in a way that felt personal and heartfelt. Maria watched quietly, feeling tears well up again. She could not comprehend why a group so feared and misunderstood by many people could show so much kindness. Yet there they were, proving that appearances could be deceiving and that generosity could come from the most unexpected places. She felt a deep sense of gratitude and relief, knowing that her family was safe, warm, and cared for on a night that had started with fear and desperation. The snow outside continued its relentless fall, piling high on the rooftops and streets. But inside the house, it was warm and cozy. The children played quietly near the fire, occasionally glancing at the bikers with wide eyes of admiration. Maria's father, now comfortably seated, sipped a cup of tea and shook his head in disbelief. He had expected nothing but a long, cold, and difficult night, and instead, he had witnessed an act of generosity that he would never forget. As the night grew deeper, the bikers began to prepare to leave, but not before ensuring that everything was in order. Blankets were neatly arranged, the fire was safely burning, and hot water was available. They gave Maria instructions on how to safely maintain the warmth through the night and offered words of encouragement. "If you need anything else, just ask," one of them said gently. "We'll do our best to help." Maria nodded, her heart full of emotion. She could barely speak, but her eyes conveyed everything she felt. Before leaving, the leader spoke once more. "Remember, it's not about us," he said quietly. "It's about helping each other when we can. That's the real meaning of Christmas." With that, he stepped outside into the snow, followed by the rest of the group. Maria watched as nearly 200 motorcycles disappeared into the storm, leaving behind warmth, safety, and a story that would stay with her family forever. After the last engine faded into the distance, Maria turned back to her children and father. "They were amazing, weren't they?" she said softly. Lily nodded, her eyes wide. "I've never met anyone like them," she whispered. Sam hugged his mother tightly. "I hope we can be heroes like them someday," he said. Maria smiled, feeling a deep sense of hope. The night had started with fear and despair, but now it was filled with inspiration, warmth, and gratitude. Maria realized that this Christmas Eve would never be forgotten. The fear, the cold, and the hopelessness had all been replaced by an experience of kindness and humanity that she could not have imagined. The bikers, often feared and misunderstood, had shown her family the true spirit of generosity, proving that compassion could come from the most unexpected places. As she tucked her children into bed that night, wrapped in the blankets provided by the bikers, Maria whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. The storm continued outside, but inside her home was warm, safe, and filled with hope. The lessons of the night were clear. Kindness knows no boundaries, appearances can be deceiving, and sometimes the most unbelievable gestures can come from the most unlikely heroes. Maria sat quietly by the fire one last time before going to bed herself. She reflected on the events of the evening, feeling a sense of wonder and gratitude that was almost overwhelming. The Hell's Angels had come into their lives for a brief moment, but their actions had left a permanent mark on her heart and the hearts of her children. It was a Christmas Eve unlike any other, one that would be remembered not for the storm or the cold, but for the warmth, generosity, and humanity shown by strangers who became heroes in their eyes. The snowstorm continued outside, heavy and unrelenting, but inside Maria's home, the atmosphere was completely transformed. The warmth from the heaters, the fire, and the blankets provided by the bikers had completely replaced the cold that had seemed impossible to escape just hours earlier. The house felt alive again, filled with light, comfort, and a sense of safety that Maria had feared lost forever. After the last of the bikers left, Maria closed the door behind them and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. The sound of engines and laughter had disappeared into the storm, leaving behind a quiet calm. She looked around the living room at her family, still bundled in blankets, sipping hot tea and smiling. Her heart swelled with gratitude and amazement. She had never expected that strangers, especially those she had once thought intimidating, could show such generosity, care, and kindness. The children, Lily and Sam, were still full of excitement and disbelief. "Mom, did that really happen?" Lily whispered, her eyes wide. "Were they really here to help us?" Maria nodded, smiling softly. "Yes, sweetie," she said. "It really happened. They came to make sure we were safe and warm. They were like Christmas angels." Sam's eyes sparkled with admiration. "I want to be like them when I grow up," he said earnestly. Maria hugged him tightly, feeling a mix of relief, pride, and hope. Her father, still sitting by the fire, shook his head slowly, a small smile on his face. "I've lived many years and I've seen a lot in this world," he said quietly. "But I have never seen anything like tonight. I never expected that a group of strangers, people so feared by many, would do something so kind for us." Maria nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. The night had begun with fear, despair, and cold, but it had ended with warmth, safety, and a renewed sense of faith in human kindness. The family spent the rest of the evening reflecting on what had happened. They shared stories of past Christmases, laughing and remembering times when life had been simpler and joyful. But this night would always stand out as the most extraordinary. It was not the gifts or the decorations, nor the meal or the small tree that made it special. It was the generosity of strangers who had gone out of their way to help, the warmth they had brought into the home, and the hope they had restored in the hearts of everyone present. Maria carefully tucked the children into bed, making sure they were fully wrapped in the blankets the bikers had provided. Their faces glowed with contentment, and they fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted but happy. Maria watched them for a moment, feeling a deep sense of peace. She knew that this experience would stay with them forever, shaping how they viewed the world and the kindness that could exist within it. Once the children were asleep, Maria returned to the living room, sitting quietly by the fire. She thought about the bikers, 200 strangers who had risked traveling through a snowstorm to help her family. She could not understand why they had done it, but she realized that sometimes actions did not need an explanation. The gesture itself was proof of the goodness that existed in people. She felt a quiet sense of humility, knowing that her family had been touched by an act of generosity that most could only dream of witnessing. The following morning, the storm had passed. The sun broke through the clouds, casting a bright light over the snow-covered town. Maria stepped outside for a moment, feeling the crisp air on her face. She looked down the street, imagining the bikers making their way back home, their mission complete. The thought of them riding through the cold and snow, only to leave quietly without expecting anything in return, filled her with awe. She realized that their actions had not only provided warmth and safety, but they had also taught her family a lesson about humanity and selflessness. As the day went on, neighbors who had heard about the bikers' visit began to stop by. Word had spread quickly through the small town, and people came to see the family, to hear the story, and to offer their own support. Many expressed disbelief, unable to imagine that a feared group could be capable of such kindness. Maria shared the story with them, her voice filled with emotion. They didn't come for recognition, she explained. They just came to help, and they stayed long enough to make sure we were safe and warm. It was unbelievable. The neighbors listened, wide-eyed and amazed. Some had been skeptical at first, thinking the bikers might cause trouble, but hearing the details of their careful, organized, and thoughtful actions changed their perspective. It became clear that appearances could be deceiving, and that generosity and compassion could come from the most unexpected sources. Maria felt proud to tell the story, knowing that it would inspire others to look beyond fear and stereotypes, and to appreciate acts of kindness wherever they might come from. In the weeks that followed, Maria's family reflected often on that Christmas Eve. The story became a part of their lives, a reminder that hope and humanity could shine even in the darkest moments. They spoke to their children about the importance of helping others, sharing what they had learned from the bikers' actions. Lily and Sam carried the lessons with them, understanding that courage, kindness, and generosity were not limited to appearances or expectations, but could be found in the heart of anyone willing to act. The family also began to reach out to others in need, inspired by the incredible gesture they had witnessed. They helped neighbors who were struggling with cold or food shortages, offered assistance to the elderly in the town, and even donated some of the blankets and supplies that had been given to them. Maria realized that the bikers' kindness had created a ripple effect, spreading warmth and compassion throughout the community. It was a lesson in how one act of generosity could inspire countless others to do good. Even years later, the story of that Christmas Eve remained vivid in Maria's memory. She could still see the motorcycles in the snow, the bikers' calm and respectful faces, and the way they moved with purpose and care. She remembered the laughter of her children, the warmth that filled the house, and the deep sense of gratitude that had washed over her. It was a memory that brought tears to her eyes every time she thought of it, not tears of sadness, but tears of awe, gratitude, and inspiration. Maria often told the story to friends, relatives, and even strangers, emphasizing the lessons it taught her family. She spoke of how fear and expectation could be misleading, how kindness could come from the most unlikely places, and how generosity, when given freely, could change lives. The story became a symbol of hope in the town, a reminder that humanity and compassion could be found in the most unexpected ways. The children grew up with the memory of that night, carrying its lessons into their own lives. They learned to look beyond appearances, to act with kindness, and to help others without expecting anything in return. The story of the bikers became a cornerstone of their understanding of the world, a reminder that even in difficult times, there was always hope, and that good deeds, no matter how small or unexpected, could have a lasting impact. Maria herself never forgot the generosity she had witnessed. She continued to live her life with gratitude and a desire to help others, inspired by the kindness of strangers on that snowy Christmas Eve. She often thought about the bikers, wondering about the journeys they continued after leaving her home, and hoping that they, too, remembered the difference they had made. Years later, when the children were grown, they would recall that night as a defining moment in their lives. They would remember the fear of the storm, the cold that seemed impossible to escape, and the incredible kindness that had turned the night into a miracle. They would remember the lessons of hope, generosity, and humanity, and carry those lessons into their own families and communities. The story of the bikers was no longer just about warmth and survival. It had become a story of inspiration, shaping the way they viewed the world and the people in it. Maria would sometimes look back and marvel at how a single, unexpected act of kindness could change everything. It was a story she would never tire of telling, a story that reminded everyone who heard it that even in the harshest conditions, warmth and generosity could shine through. The night had begun with fear, cold, and uncertainty, but it ended with warmth, hope, and a lesson that would last a lifetime. And in the hearts of everyone involved, Maria, her children, her father, and the bikers who had come without expectation, the memory remained vivid, a shining example of how kindness and humanity could overcome fear and adversity. It was, without a doubt, a Christmas Eve that none of them would ever forget. A night when strangers became heroes, a family was saved from despair, and the true spirit of generosity was revealed in its purest, most unforgettable form.